If you don't show you've got a bit of a sense of irony, I just think that is such an essential British trait. If you don't show you don't take yourself entirely seriously, well, yeah, it's not all that serious sometimes. Yes, it is serious in many cases, but hey, you can have a laugh at yourself. I don't think you'll do very well.
Welcome to the Humourology podcast with me, Paul Boross, and my glittering lineup of guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, who are going to share their wisdom and their use of humour with you. Humourology is the study of how humour can dramatically improve your business and your life. Humourology puts the fun into business fundamentals, increases the value of your laughing stock, and puts a punchline back into your bottom line. Please remember to like, subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. My guest on this edition of the Humourology podcast is a multi-award-winning baron of broadcasting. From the BBC to ITV to CNBC Europe to Sky News, he has built a legendary career presenting the nation's most important news. In addition to being one of the most notable newsreaders in the nation, for many years he mirthfully measured man's mastery on the BBC quiz show Eggheads. Not only can he leave audiences laughing as master of ceremonies whilst hosting huge conferences around the world, but he has also been trusted to break some of the world's most meaningful moments to millions. Dermot Murnaghan, welcome to the Humourology podcast.
Very nice to be here, Paul. What a nice introduction. I'll take that. Baron of broadcasting.
Well, we like alliteration here, but you are the Baron of broadcasting. You can now put it on your cards.
Yes, so the Lord of the Airwaves.
Yeah. Well, talking of the airwaves, you've worked for many years predominantly on live TV, where things frequently go wrong and it can be very stressful. Do you think that having a sense of humour is important in those situations?
Paul, it's more than important. It's essential. I mean, it really is absolutely essential. If in your head, when something goes wrong, and it can be, a million things. I mean, I can't actually think of a single day that goes by in the live sphere when, something, and it would usually be fairly minor, goes wrong. But if in your head you can't imagine yourself as the viewer quite enjoying it or thinking, oh, poor sod at the other end, then you're not able to deal with it. You kind of have to have an out-of-body experience, I think. And also a forgiving nature, because some of my colleagues with a less forgiving nature, and I won't name any names, definitely not, can get a bit cross about it. And I sometimes see people on air who are signalling to the audience that they're cross with their producer. I'm sure you never get cross with Simon, of course, but it doesn't work because all they can see is you, and they think, you silly old sausage, it's you that's messing it up. What are you blaming your producers for? Yeah,
well, that's really interesting, isn't it? But that's called leadership to me, isn't it? Because you have to bring the team together, because there's a big team that puts the news on screen. And if you are one of those people who actually starts blaming and pointing fingers, and also your face is in a very large way responsible for communicating the information. So,
that is a really good point. I just want to pick on that instantly, Paul, because that really chimes with my beliefs. Is that it's kind of leadership, but it's about being collegiate as well. Because just because you're the Billy Big Boots appearing on screen, and television, however good the technology gets, nobody gets on screen without at least 25 people somewhere, probably more, doing exactly as difficult a job as you do to get you there. So you ain't the most important thing there. You're just part of that great machine that puts it on air. Yes, you are the face of it, but it's your job to deal with it. And let me tell you, it's better than a real job. Reading out loud and dealing with the odd cock up or two, who wouldn't want to do that? And the poor people who've worked really hard all day on a graphic or on whatever it is that perhaps doesn't go right. Well, don't blame them for it if it doesn't go right. They've tried their best by and large, and it's not just because you're on screen doesn't make you the person who can then point the finger of blame.
Well, it's interesting from a leadership standpoint, and you've seen thousands of leaders come through the studio and you've had to work with them. How important is a sense of humour to good leadership on that level?
Well, I mean, it's essential. I mean, in terms of in terms of the leaders, and I by and large interview leaders in some way, shape, or form, mainly politicians. But in my past, I was actually a business journalist and interviewed an awful lot of so-called leaders of industry. And yeah, humans, I don't know about their own companies or organizations behind them and how often they employ humor. But if they're in a way using, which they usually are, using my medium to get a message across, yes, to the wider public, but also it's back, isn't it, to your own organisation, then humour's essential, absolutely essential. And to communicate to the audience, if you don't show you've got a bit of a sense of irony, I just think that is such an essential British trait. If you don't show, you don't take yourself entirely seriously. Yeah, you're fully across your brief and all the rest of it, but you understand that, well, yeah, it's not all that serious sometimes. Yes, it is serious in many cases, but hey, you can have a laugh at yourself. I don't think you'll do very well if you can communicate that when you're sitting in my studio, and it can be difficult because I'm an ornery bastard who try and put you on the spot. But then, you can break through the interviewer as well. You can actually prick the pomposity of the twit that's sitting across. And I mean, I'm that twit asking you silly questions that they haven't researched hard enough.
So do you think there's a link between humour and humility in the way people come across?
Yeah. Absolutely. Whether you are or humble or not. I mean, I know for a fact, some of the hardest people with the hardest reputation, in the city or whatever, have sat in with me and come across as people you'd like. This is the test, isn't it? It goes for politicians. The test you always do is in the focus groups, you ask people, would you like to go and have a drink with them? And, I've sat around with people who afterwards my producer goes, they just come in the studio after sacking 250 people in a single day and telling them to clear their desks instantly. You go, oh, okay, right, yeah, seem nice person to me.
Well, that's really interesting because you have interviewed an extraordinary cross range of people, from heads of state to leaders all over the world, but also Mike Tyson and Desmond Tutu and everybody in between.
Yeah.
So what are your tips? Because our audience wants something to take away for people being interviewed on TV.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. First of all, a little sense of irony. You mentioned Mike Tyson. Basically, don't interview Mike Tyson because he might hit you, which he nearly did live on air when I suggested to him that that he hadn't apologised enough for his prison sentence. I won't go into that there, but it was live television, and Mike was a millisecond away from demonstrating the power of his right hook live on air. Which actually afterwards I came trembling off air. It was live television. I came trembling off air after quite seriously he had told me that he decided not to hit me. I came off air trembling, went into my editor's studio who'd watched it all. I said, that must have been a good watch. He said, yeah, it was brilliant. I said, do you know what? He was going to hit me at one point. And the editor goes, yeah, it's just a pity he didn't. I thought, thank you very much indeed, because I would certainly have had no teeth, probably have been unconscious. I think the other thing, I mean, this is humour, irony, preparation in terms of the kind of questions that are kind of going to come your way, but that's obvious. You're always going to do that, but have the knowledge in your head that you're always going to know more because it's your organisation or your policy or whatever. You're always going to know more than the interviewer. You really are. They'll have some more tricks. May ask you what the price of a pint of milk is, or something, like that. But if you haven't prepared for that, then you shouldn't really be in the studio. And don't baffle them and therefore the audience with technical ease. But just be approachable. say you've got it wrong there, and these are the true facts about my organisation and my business. But don't ramble. Make the point. Move on. Put the interviewer in their place. Yeah, this is media training we're getting into now.
Well, it is, and it's very interesting. But I wonder, because, I mean, knowing how you work and how quickly news organizations work, you're literally, as I've been, you've interviewed me and wheeled into the studio, and that's the first time you see you're sat down. The interviewer, like yourself, is being talked to down the line or something by his producer, so you get a chance to say hello. But somebody who walks into a studio has to be aware that there's still got to be some kind of building of rapport, hasn't there, with somebody like you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea if you can, but you're right. I mean, a lot of it, what I do is live television and live events. And so, I remember we've talked together quite a lot, in different spheres. And it can happen with 30 seconds notice in terms of, I know that I'm interviewing you or not. And building that rapport is terribly, terribly difficult beforehand. One way not to do it, by the way, is in terms of the media training thing. I've seen quite a lot of people come in to my studio who with that 20, 30 seconds we've got before we go live say, what's your first question? Two things on that. I probably don't know what it is. And secondly, if I do know what it is, I'm not going to tell you, so I'll tell you the wrong question and then ask you a different one, because you've clearly got a prepared answer. And that's not being nasty. No, it's not being nasty. It's just, I don't want a pre-prepared answer. I want you to be natural, and that's the real thing. That's all I want you to be. So if I tell you my first question and you give me a pre-prepared answer, that is dull, really goddamn dull. Now, if you're clever, I'll ask you a different question, and if it's the old Tony Blair trick, isn't it? The absolute grand master of seeming to answer a question without doing that. I'll ask you the different question, and you'll still be able to tell me your pre-prepared answer by, a little bit of zigzagging around, and you get to, well, Dermot, what the point really is this. And then I'm sitting there going, you swine.
But is that much more prevalent now? I mean, I see you interview politicians all the time, and it's a lot of the time I keep thinking your job's getting harder and harder and harder because they're not answering any of the questions, and they've got all this preamble waffle that used to just be, I'm glad you asked me that, but now involves huge amounts of I'm talking so you can't interrupt me and we're just using up the time in order to be able to get to that.
Yeah, you're right. It is a real problem. And there's been a couple of phases, I think, in the evolution of that during the course of my career. And we've moved on from the kind of Paxman Humphreys era, I think, now just sticking the boot in. And in a way, they're not hearing anything at all from the politician, and more from, and not just those two men, but plenty of others. I myself have indulged in plenty of kind of interruptive interviews in the past. Then I think we moved into, okay, well, let's try it this way. Let's listen and listen and listen and listen. And then you're right, you end up with these 4 or 5 minute answers. You think, this isn't a party political broadcast. Yeah. Address the question and have a conversation, which never happens, with a politician. It never happens. And you're right, we've now reached this phase, and I hope it is just a phase, where all the politicians we seem to have got in senior positions are so damn scared of, the bosses at the top and those that advise them. I mean, they're terrified that they stick to the party line. And you've got to remember this about the L word, about lying, which you can't use in Parliament. And it's seen as, even outside it's seen as, let's say, difficult, problematic to call politicians liars. But in a sense, and I'm just got to caveat this, in a sense, they all are, certainly at cabinet rank, because of collective responsibility. Now, once somebody gets into the cabinet, they're bound by collective responsibility and therefore have to support a policy that they don't necessarily support, or that they might have, within the space, after there's been a reshuffle, as there has been recently, within the space of the last few weeks, have spoken against. But they will then appear in your studio or on the airwaves supporting that policy and telling you why it's a very good idea. And and if this is the definition of lying, maybe it's broader than that, but they are saying something that they personally don't believe in. Is that lying or isn't it? I don't know, but I don't think it helps with the world of public discourse.
No, I don't think so either. But do you think, I mean, continuing that theme, is humour and essentially charisma now essential to get on in politics?
It's the opposite. It used to be. I mean, we all knew, those wonderful politicians of all parties. They'd come into the studio, and even if they were, going to discuss a difficult policy, they'd have a turn of phrase. They'd have a bit of an ability to say something in a way, not necessarily humorous, but in a way that was engaging, and showed that they had, wider interest, the hinterland, understood the difficulties. I mean, I can. It's dangerous if I start, naming names, but they are in the past from all parties. I see very few of them now, and any of them that are left in Parliament now are, kind of older, lacking or not needing, the greasy pole of the party. They're not looking for advancement anymore, so they feel freer to speak. But they're getting winnowed out rapidly. I should say though, and while we're talking about humour in politics specifically, should point out the Prime Minister again. I'm not talking in any party political way, but look, there is an example of all the kind of robotic people that, with the best will in the world, do surround the Prime Minister, and indeed in other parties as well. He's not one of them. How has Boris Johnson got so far? Because of his engagement with the public. The public don't know Boris Johnson as a politician, first and foremost. They knew him as a kind of entertaining media guy. Have I got news for you? The columns, the millions of words he used to write. That's how they know Boris Johnson, and he's continued with that. And a lot of, political professionals and people in my industry criticize him for his lack of grasp of detail and policy. But focus group after focus group, which they do on a daily basis, comes back and say, on that test I mentioned earlier, who would you like to have a pint with? Would it be, and they name all the party leaders, and number one by a street is Boris Johnson. And he has harnessed that ability, and the dissembling, the shirt tucked out, the messy hair, it may or may not be studied, but it has worked for him so far.
Well, it's a brand, isn't it, really? And it's a deliberate brand. But it's kind of what I meant by the question, like to get to the true pinnacle of politics, is that what you have to do now? Because you're being judged against what we'll call the Boris factor of charisma or perceived charisma and perceived humour, that you are now being judged for that. So anybody who's up against him doesn't stand as much of a chance. Is that fair, or is that real?
It's an impossible question, Paul. I just think it's impossible because cometh the hour, cometh the person. To paraphrase, it depends what times you kind of live in. Boris is a booster, as he said. He's Tiggerish, is the latest phrase to describe his cabinet, and it kind of suits the times. Everyone's a bit gloomy, and he's continually trying to lift things. But my view is that if things get really bad, economically particularly, then the time for the so-called technocrats comes along. You want someone, dull as ditch water, wearing some very dull glasses, speaking in a monotone, who will actually sort out the mess.
Right. Well, you've got your first degree was in history, wasn't it? And so yeah. I suppose history does show us that does happen, that suddenly you get the grey man comes in and takes over when it's all gone to pot.
Yeah, that's precisely it. And in terms of, the configuration of the Conservative Party at the moment, with, Boris Johnson at the top with those features we described there, but most of the rest of those around him absolutely sending off the, indistinguishable signals to the public. The polling of the public on who do you know in the cabinet is, they're in low double figures, and that's the best of them, and plenty of them are in single figures, and some of them are the absolute when they bring the substitute on at football. Who? And I think that is the way. I think that is the way Boris Johnson likes it. To challenge him within his party or from another party, would they have to be, um, even more Coco the Clown than him? I just don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting idea. Do you go the opposite way and just play it straight, as it were, which is, I think, what is happening at the moment?
Well, it's that definition, and it is, it's younger people, isn't it? It's about authenticity. If people whiff now, that's the thing, whether it's humour or not. If you're a dull person, stay dull. Don't try and be funny. I mean, as you know, you must know from your podcast, there's nothing worse than somebody who's actually just not got a funny bone trying to pretend they have one. Be yourself, whatever you are, and by and large, there is some humour in you somewhere. I'm sounding like a kind of Mary Poppins song, You will find it.
Well, do you think there is humour in everyone on some level then?
Yeah, it's whether you're being laughed at or being laughed along with, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but it's an interesting thing because you've spent sort of many years on the news and quiz shows and as an accomplished awards presenter and host. I know that you're valued for your charm, your confidence, your professionalism to win over all manner of audiences. But do you think that is enough? Or do you think to be truly successful, you need a facility with an understanding of comedy?
Comedy and absurdity, and I think I don't want to get too philosophical about this, but about existentialism. And especially where you exist if we're talking about our society in the developed in the rich part of the world. However bad things get, they ain't as bad. It's your mother telling you to finish your food because there are people starving all around the world. It's that sense of grounding, of the absurdity of the lottery of life, which is kind of serious and humorous as well. I do a test on my children when they were growing up. When we talk about these things, what fun it was around our dinner table, we talk about. They talk to me, come and say, Dad, they're like all young people, we're really, really worried about, the situation. We've seen this on the news, and we're worried about the situation in this country or that country, and of course, the climate. Not too very long ago, we were talking about migration, and they're saying, wow, wow, what do we do about this? And I put this test to them. I said, how many people do you think, we're lucky enough, we've got a garden, I've got a lawn, I've got a shed, I keep my lawnmower in it, I've got a cat. And I said, let's put these two things together. And our shed, which I'm obviously every now and again get put out in. So the lawnmower's there as well, but it has electricity and it has a little water tap. So there you are. You know where I'm going here. I said to them, how many people in the world do you think, if they were allowed to come here, would come and live beside our lawnmower and eat what the cat eats? Because I'm told that cat food is, all heat treated and it's not the best cuts of meat, but it won't kill you and it's nutritious. It's got protein in the cat lives off it. How many people do you think would, live off cat food and sleep in my shed if they could come here? And they go, oh, I don't know, 1,000. 100,000 or whatever. And I said, well, you just look at UN statistics about the number of people who are at, it's proper poverty levels and indeed at starvation levels, and you're into the billions, and that's the thing I kind of hope I put in front of them, and that's the thing I've always carried in my journalistic career.
No, and that's brilliant, and it suddenly reminded of me of my father, God rest his soul, who was an economist. And he was a Hungarian refugee, and he came over here. And when he used to work in statistics, he said, when I was having my worst day, I would go and look up the statistics for the world when it was still in books. And he goes, even at my poorest, I was still in the top 8% of the world's wealth. And humour does give you a perspective.
Yeah.
On life.
That is good. 8%. Right. I'm going to have, is Professor Boross. Right. Yeah, I'll have that. Thank you.
Well, this was a while ago. Unfortunately, he's passed. So he's. But those kind of things stay with you. So I mean, to do that with your kids, I think giving them a sense of humour and a sense of perspective is key to a long and happy life, which is what the Humourology project is all about. So, what makes you laugh, Dermot?
Oh, well, we've been touching upon it, isn't it? The absurdity of the human condition and how people point it up. Isn't that the very basis, I guess, of humour?
Humour is truth, isn't it? They say humour is tragedy plus time. So, but also it has to have a kernel of truth in it, because you have to go, oh, that could have been me, or that's what I do, and understand. And I also think understanding the ridiculousness of everything. And you and I know each other, and we look at our careers and go, A, lucky bastards, but B, ridiculous ways to earn a living for both of us.
Oh, that's for sure. But let's not. You blew a bit of smoke towards my fundament to do it back. It's also hard work. In terms of the area you're in, if you want to shine in an environment, it goes for anything. And if you want to be good at humour, I mean. You can work at it, you can polish it. As I say, there are some people who are naturally going to be way, way, way funnier than others, but they can be even funnier, and we see that in people like yourself.
Well, I ask everybody this on the podcast. Can you tell me a true funny story about something that's happened to you?
Well, they're all excruciating. As we discussed earlier, nary a day goes by without something awful or potentially awful happening on air. I mean, I've had some the autobiography hasn't come out yet, but it's already bulging with with files. So let me. They're all so embarrassing. One of the worst experiences of my life was, but also afterwards I had to see the humour in it, which nearly ended my career before it had started. Was way back in. I started way back in the 80s, and I was lucky enough at the end of the 80s to get an assignment to Japan. It was so exciting. I'd never been before for the death, not exciting a death, of the old war emperor, Emperor Hirohito. He was, I don't know, in his late 80s or 90s then, and was dying in the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. This is a really funny story, isn't it? But as things happened, the way the Japanese then covered it was all the coverage you got about the state of health of the emperor, including his bowel movements. Now, say, posted on a little sheet of paper every morning outside Taikoko, the Imperial Palace in the center of Tokyo, and that's all you've got to think. And Emperor Hirohito hung on for a very long time. So I was there for about 6 weeks, and my producer's going, "You've got 6 weeks, you're staying in the Imperial Hotel overlooking the Imperial Palace, you're chewing up all this money, you've got to go out and do some reports for us on other things. You can't just go every morning to the Imperial Palace, read out stuff about the Emperor's bowel movements, which we can't broadcast because, they're a little too intimate, and we're not interested anyway. We just want to know, when the old war criminal's dead," and then assess his legacy. So as a result, we were sent out doing some features. This is the late 80s, in very technologically advanced in Tokyo. So here's the story. We decide to go to, and it doesn't sound revolutionary now, but it was in 1989, to one of the biggest department stores, I forget its name, in central Tokyo. We set it all up with the management. It's all very bureaucratic. And we filmed cashless payments. Unheard of in Europe at the time, 32 years ago. They had cashless payments, card, everything we're familiar with now. So 32 years ago. And as you know, shooting these sequences, it takes the time, so, and we've got endless amounts of time as well, because the emperor is still, as far as I know, doing handsprings around his bedroom and not dying. So we're we're filming this small angles. We only got one camera guy, and he's shooting it this way and getting the light there. And we had a young shop assistant, and her hands, a close up of her hands, a close up of the card, a close up of the till, and a close, all shot, and it's taking 4 or 5 hours. And I'm redundant at this point at shooting all the technical stuff as the reporter. So I had got a little Japanese phrase book and had used the 4 hours to learn some Japanese phrases. I knew a bit, but we obviously had a translator as well, a fixer. And at the end of it, finally, the young assistant, we bow, and she speaks no English, I speak no Japanese. And out of my phrase book, I say in Japanese to her, spent 4 hours learning this phrase. Thank you very much indeed. You are a very good actress. The manager who's standing beside rushes over to punch me, is restrained by our fixer. She bursts into tears, the assistant. I mean, uncontrollable floods of tears, and runs off. And my fixer, who's been standing some way off me with the phrase book, goes, "What have you done?" And we're ejected. The tapes are taken from us. The whole report's over. We're ejected instantly from the department store. And he goes, "What have you done?" All I said to her was, "Thank you very much. You're a very good actress." And he said, show me the phrases. And I had said, "Thank you very much. Manage that. You are a very good," and use the, how do I put it, the archaic phrase for actress, which actually, you think about it, in the UK, Nell Gwyn was an actress.
Yes.
And I'd called her a hooker. So, yeah, that went swimmingly well. Yeah, nearly ejected from the whole of Japan.
Oh, well, that is a lovely story. And what's the hidden value in that, learning in that?
Yeah, just if you've got a fixer who can speak fluent Japanese, don't try it yourself.
What would the world be like without humour?
Very dull. I don't think humanity would exist. Is this one of the traits, the characteristics that sets us apart? I don't know. Maybe birds do have a sense of humour. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I mean, it's essential. It's more than greases. It lubricates human relations. That's how we get on.
Well, I think you're 100% right, because I think if we didn't have any humour, we have no perspective on the world. And I think maybe that's what it does. And isn't it strange that you've interviewed all these people? And of course, when you get into sort of people who are trying to totalitarian states, just let's say, they try and get rid of the humour, don't they? Because it worries them.
That is a really good point, actually. Yeah, and as you can guess, I've reported on a few totalitarian states in my time. In actual fact, this is what a fun guy I am to be with. I just took on my recent holiday reading a book called The Grey Men, all about the Stasi in East Germany, and just how they haven't actually gone away. But the description of that society, precisely as you described there, the whole point, humour is dangerous, because what do we want to do with humour? One of the main planks of it is you want to slightly take the piss out of the hierarchies. Terrible idea in any totalitarian state. That's disloyalty. And then you end up with, I think this is one of the awful things about, about a state like that, was that you end up, and they've found out an awful lot about it when they've preserved quite a lot of the archive, not the majority of it, and you find out that your children were literally grassing you up, or you were grassing your children up for making the odd joke or two about the Politburo.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have, I had a friend who was from South Africa and who actually put on comedy nights and then had to escape in the middle of the night because he was warned that they were coming to get him. It was just like, wow, just for putting on comedy.
Yeah. Well, I guess your dad. I mean, you say your dad was Hungarian. Did he escape before it moved
No,
into
he
the
escaped
what?
after 56
Right.
because he was, well, when I say involved in the uprising, he was one of many people on the streets. And they basically said, they're rounding people up. You better. So he got a train as far as he could and then walked for 4 days in the snow to get out, leaving everything behind, literally.
Yeah.
So, but funny enough, he said that the thing that got them through was the sense of humour.
Yeah. But you see, that's the point, is it? But it's also so undermining to leadership. It's back to the point I made earlier. It's that point: are you laughing with us or at us? If you're laughing at us, and you still see it, in plenty of these so-called populist parties, left or right. I mean, it's amazing how many of them are, how many of the leadership are actually from a comedy background or a light entertainment background. I mean, we've seen it in Italy, obviously, seeing it in Bulgaria at the moment, and plenty of other countries as well. And it's just so undermining of the leadership. I think it's quite interesting when you get to, obviously, we're not a totalitarian regime. We're the very opposite of that. We're a bastion of human rights and democracy with all the faults, whatever. But you actually got the funny guy who's not a comedian in charge.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting, isn't it, the way that swings? I just wanted to ask you, before we get on to quick fire questions, I want to ask you, in the old days, we had the "and finally" stories at the end of the news, and that seems to have gone a bit for a Burton. Is humour important to help people cope with the torrent of bad news? And do we need more roller skating ducks?
Yes, we do. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We are, we're snowed under with people feeling depressed by watching the news. Climate change isn't very funny. COVID isn't. There's a long list of awfulness that I deal with on a daily basis. But within that, there are those skateboarding ducks. There are the water skiing squirrels. Let's have a little bit more of them, because people can take light and shade.
Well, and do you think it's incumbent on to put more light into live television or into news television? Because because the phrase "if it bleeds, it leads."
That's a tricky one. Yeah. I mean, that's not entirely true, but the awfulness. I've heard various members of my community, the news reading community, news anchor community, suggesting, we need good news shows, and somehow, they don't kind of work, because people, maybe they want to hear the bad news first. I think the "and finally" is the right place for it. I think within some of the other stories, you could actually insert a little bit more. It's not humour, but it's back to that. Really, is it? The irony, I suppose, is the phrase.
But isn't that? I think that's one of the ways you do your job so well. That even in the midst of a serious interview, you can find a time for levity, in appropriate levity. Is that not true?
Yeah, well, with me, quite often it's sarcasm, I must admit, which is maybe not the lowest form, but it certainly isn't the top. But I just find myself, I think, my family was quite sarcastic. I think it's, quite a trait around these parts of the world, just to bring you down, and it is just, you know it all. And I find myself, particularly with politicians, when I've got a trigger now, back to the robotic answers you get. I've got a trigger. There's two phrases. I shouldn't give this away, which actually trigger me. I go, newsreader Hulk here. I go all green underneath here. I'm not sure I've got the muscular chest to match, but they are. We are listening carefully to the proposals. You think, are you? That means you've thrown it in the bin. And the other one, we're going to do everything we can. I've heard that phrase today a lot. We're going to do everything we can. So particularly on that one, I go, Right, so everything you can. So would that be diverting the entire budget of the United Kingdom to this issue? Because you could do that because you're the government. And then they just go, don't be ridiculous, damn it. And I'm triggered by stock phrases.
Well, that's really interesting because I think what you do really well is in psychology we call it meta modeling, where you go, okay, how specifically are you going to do everything you can? You know,
So you just exactly that. You just ask, very simple questions. And they said, well, we can't get into the detail. And I said, well, that's what people want. We're going to build 400,000 more houses. I mean, the hundreds of thousands of houses have been going to be built in every single manifesto by every single major party for the last 25 years. And you see precious few of them. But so you just say, well, just tell me how. There's a plot of land at the back of my house. How would you build affordable housing on that? Well, I don't know the area. You think, no, but it's general. I'm conducting the interview in my own head.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, and I love when you do that. Now we come to the part of the show, Dermot, we like to call quick fire questions.
Oh dear.
Quick fire questions.
Who is the funniest? And actually, I'm going to even go a little bit deeper. The funniest and the most surprised. Actually, I'd like the funniest business person or politician or somebody you've interviewed, but also the most surprising, somebody who surprised you and you thought everything you'd heard about them was that they were quite dour, but they turned it around and surprised you.
Oh, straight business person is a guy, very, very good business operator, perhaps not particularly well known, a guy called Wilf Walsh, who fits that category. He used to run a big bookmakers, he used to run Coral Bookmakers, and I remember once bumping into him thinking, he's going to be quite a lot of horsey people, and bookmaking people are pretty, up and down here. Bottom line, how do I make money out of those sad punters? Wilf Walsh has got all the qualities that we've mentioned during the course of this chat. Irony, self-deprecation, seeing the funny side and everything. I think he now runs Carpet Right or something like that. But Wilf is a top guy, and not to be confused with his namesake Willie Walsh, a not so funny guy.
Yeah, no, we'll leave it there on that one.
Oh, Michael O'Leary as well. I think he's very funny. Perhaps not good for his brand, but I do love. I mean, the first time I interviewed him was back shortly after Ryanair had been set up. About the classic. So tell me, Mr. O'Leary, what is this that you're not taking complaints seriously? And he said, damn it, of course we take our complaints seriously. Who said that? And I read out this long list, from complaints. I said, well, look, just look out, look here, there's 400 of them or whatever. Said, really? He said, how dare they say that? Our complaints line is open every third Wednesday of the month from 11:45 to 11:46, and we won't have it any different. And I just thought, you're mad.
But it works, doesn't it? Because it shifts people's attention somewhere else. And once they're laughing, it's much easier to play that game. Brilliant. What book makes you laugh?
Loads. I think one which really, one from way back when, I read it 30, 40 years ago, A Confederacy of Dunces, John Kennedy Toole, bloke that very sadly committed suicide shortly after writing the book. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize posthumously for him. But really, I mean, not an attractive main character, but really, really quietly hilarious.
Brilliant. What film makes you laugh?
It's got to be, hasn't it? Anchorman 1 and 2, if I can have two. For someone in the business, it's actually not a comedy. I think it's more of a documentary. Okay.
We're going to take a shift to the other side now. What is not funny?
Yeah, well, things that I don't find funny in terms of attempted humour were Nazis, never found LOLO funny. I can't go there. I can't. Maybe as a historian, I just can't find any humour there.
But that's interesting. When the producers,
Yeah.
funny.
No, yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I do. I think maybe Mel Brooks found a way of doing that, but yeah, by and large, no. Yeah, actually, yeah, the producers would be on one of the all-time funniest films. So you got me there, Paul. And yeah, that's it, really. Yeah.
Okay. What word makes you laugh, Dermot?
Wow. Vercingetorix, the Gaul. That's 3 words.
Say that again, because I missed that.
I might be mispronouncing it. Vercingetorix. It's from the Asterix books. You always used to. I don't know why. You always used to make me laugh. Yeah, look, that's just free association. I have no deep.
No, well, I remember reading Asterix when I was young, but I had no memory of those words, to be honest with you. Vercingetorix.
That or maybe Jetorix, probably. That's the free association nature of this quickfire round.
Yeah, absolutely.
I never knew that was going to come out.
Well, as the Monty Python said, free association football. Would you rather be considered clever or funny?
Well, I'm sure everyone says but yeah, don't you have to be? I mean, to be funny, I think you have to be a bit clever. Certainly, if you are funny, people think you're clever. So maybe funny, because I'd like to be both.
Well, yeah, and I actually think that that's a really good point, because I think I've met very few comedians who aren't actually very sharp on that level, because you have all the synapses of the brain have to be firing very, very quickly to make those associations in order to be funny. So I think your choice is correct, actually.
Thank you.
And finally, Desert Island Gags. If you could only take one joke with you to a desert island, what would it be?
I can hardly remember any jokes, but one that sticks with me, and I'm mentally editing this because this is one from way back when that my dad told me, which I didn't understand when he told me it, but I now do, because I was about 6 or 7. I'm just mentally editing this, Paul, because my dad said, did you hear about the agnostic, dyslexic insomniac who used to lie awake at night worrying if there is a dog? I think that's okay. But obviously,
yes, it is.
I thought that was very clever of him to tell me that so young, because I used to lay awake at night going, why is that funny?
Yeah. Well, no, but he actually took you on a journey to discovering and learning.
Until I got a dictionary, till I could read a dictionary.
Oh, that's brilliant. Dermot, thank you so much for sharing that joke, that knowledge, and your great humour with us on the Humourology podcast.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Humourology podcast was hosted by Paul Boross and produced by Simon Banks. Music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.